Okay, Rebel Moon Part 2, The Scargiver. I do have a review up for Part 1, if you want to check that out. I will leave a link by you. But yeah, I've been looking forward to Part 2. I have been looking forward to the continuation of this story from Zack Snyder. I am a big fan of Zack Snyder as an artist, as a director. I'm a big fan of his visual style. And even though I had a lot of issues with Part 1, I was very fascinated and intrigued by the world he was creating. So, Part 2. So, the film takes place on the moon of Veldt, where Kora and the crew of warriors help the farmers to defend and fight for their home against the Mother World. The warriors face a past, revealing their motivations before the Imperium forces arrive to crush the growing rebellion. Okay, I'm going to start with a positive view. What I do like about this movie, or the Part 1 and Part 2, and what I admire about them is the fact that Zack Snyder has attempted to create his own world, his own characters, his own story. And I really appreciate that. I really I find it very intriguing. Yes, it's very clearly heavily inspired by a lot of other big franchises that a lot of us have grown up with over the years within cinema, like Star Wars, Starship Troopers, Dune, Lord of the Rings even. Do you know what I mean? There is so many, and you could see that it's clearly, Zack Snyder is clearly inspired by these big iconic stories that a lot of us have grown up with. And what I really admire about these movies, Part 1 and Part 2, is his attempt to create something, to create his own world, to create his own characters and his story. I really admire that. The big issue for me with both Part 1 and Part 2, I have the same issues with both movies, and that is how these ideas are executed. It's how the story is told to us and how the story is structured. Like, for example, there's moments in Part 2 that I strongly believed belonged in Part 1 and should have been in Part 1. Like this moment with all the warriors sort of going into their pasts and sort of explaining to us why they're, what makes them motivated, what makes them tick, what's driving these characters. And I was just so frustrated because I was like, why are we only now getting this? We really needed this scene in the first part. And don't get me wrong, Part 1 I felt like there was already too much going on. But again, it goes back to how this story was told and structured. And I just felt like they've gone the wrong way about it. There was no real attempt to really get us emotionally wrapped up within these characters' stories. And as a result, along with a very poor writing, like the writing isn't that great, I just can't help but feel nothing for these characters. I really couldn't give a shit about any of these characters, even though in Part 2 they start explaining sort of their history and what it is they've gone through. I still couldn't care because it just all felt a little bit too late. And the writing is a major issue for me. I feel like the performances are actually hindered within this movie by the writing. Sometimes the performances can kind of come across a little bit wooden, but I'm also sort of like, is that because of the writing? And yeah, the writing just lacks any soul or humanity. It's very kind of clunky and mechanical, and it's designed to serve one purpose. And that is to sort of really kind of, in this sort of the simplest of ways, explain what it is these characters are going to do next and what it is they need to do. It's very like, it's sort of like the characters themselves, just everything in this film and this experience just lacked any weight and depth. There's just no soul and humanity there, and a lot of that is down to the writing and just sort of, how this story is told and the way in which it's structured. And I just feel like Zack Snyder has got this is a bit of an ongoing issue that I've got with Zack Snyder, and I feel like he's always trying to run before he can walk with these big sort of ambitious, epic stories that it is that he's attempting to tell. And what I mean by running before he can walk with these sort of big, epic, ambitious ideas that he's got for these stories, what I mean by that is he just forgets about the key ingredient, when it comes to making a story that can sort of just wrap us up and get us involved with these characters' journeys and get us, emotionally connected to these characters. Allow us to actually care for these characters and want to be on this journey. He completely sort of forgets about that. Like, he knows it's, we need it, but it's almost like Zack Snyder is more concerned about just throwing us into the next big epic moment with the next sort of cool epic, slow-mo shot of, someone chopping down some wheat or something. And it's like, yes, visually I like it. I'm not gonna lie, I'm going to admit it. Like I said, from a visual perspective, I am a big fan of Snyder. But there's not a lot of soul there. There's not a lot of heart there. There's not a lot of character. And I love sort of what it is that he's trying to do, sort of, what it is he's trying to tell on a sort of a much bigger scale in regards to the story. But he just completely forgets what it is that's supposed to get us emotionally involved and for us to actually, care about these characters' journeys. And unfortunately, he did the same thing with the DCEU. When it comes to Batman v Superman and Justice League, I feel like one of the reasons why those films didn't quite work for a lot of people, like, I'm actually a fan of those movies anyway, but one of the issues within those movies was, he was running before he could walk. Like, he wasn't allowing us to sort of really get to know these characters and to understand these characters. Already we were getting a team-up movie. I don't kind of want to sort of go off on a tangent here. What I'm sort of talking about now is probably better for another video. But I feel like that issue that I've got, and I think a lot of other people have got with Zack Snyder, has never been more evident than it has with Rebel Moon Part 1 and Part 2. Rebel Moon Part 2 really suffers as a result of all the missteps with Part 1 and sort of how Zack Snyder chose to tell this story and sort of how he chose to introduce us to this world and to these characters. A big part of why Part 2 doesn't work for me is because of Part 1. It makes sense. It's one story. It's just a continuation of the story that he started with A Child of Fire. So it's like, it makes sense. Because he fails to get us invested with these characters to begin with in Part 1, I think that is why, for the most part, Part 2 really just didn't work for me. And yes, from a visual perspective, I liked it. There's a lot of really nice visuals and moments. And sort of like, there's a lot from a sort of aesthetic and sort of just world building as perspective that I just really liked about the film. And again, going back to sort of those ideas and what it is that Zack Snyder is trying to do, I really appreciate it. But as an experience, I found it to be quite dull. Part 2 was a very dull, bland experience, with no heart, no soul. Again, the attempt is there, but it's let down by the writing and just how the story is structured. The experience often made me wonder, why were we getting this as a film, this story as a movie? A part of me does wonder if this story would have worked better as a TV show maybe. And one of the biggest disappointments for me was the continuation of the villain story, Atticus Noble, this admiral, who's played, by the way, brilliantly by Ed Skrein. He is absolutely wasted in this movie. Like, when it comes to bringing a bad guy to life, like playing a real mean, twisted motherfucker, Ed Skrein does a fantastic job at it. He does a great job of bringing these type of characters to life. But his journey, his character's story is completely wasted. So, spoiler alert, if you haven't watched Part 1 yet, then please don't watch any further, as I'm about to delve into a spoiler regarding the villain Atticus Noble. With that being said, so Atticus Noble dies at the end of Part 1, and then he's brought back to life again with Part 2. And that whole thing with him dying and then just being brought back to life ended up feeling so fucking pointless. Like, I sat there and I was like, that really honestly just felt like they did it because they needed a cliffhanger to sort of get people sort of excited for Part 2. Because it did nothing to sort of expand upon the character or do something new with the character. And yeah, we just get the same sort of guy, the same character, but there's no growth, there's no development. You know, we don't get any further insight to what it is that motivates this character and sort of why this character is who he is and why he acts the way he is and sort of makes him tick. And then I was kind of hoping for something a little bit more extreme with the character. You know, perhaps, you know, there's a lot that's changed with him mentally and all of that, and it's nothing, like nothing. The character doesn't evolve from what's happened to him at the end of part 1. And that was like one of the frustrating things I had with the character with part 1 was we didn't really get any insight to what it is that made the character tick and sort of his motivations and all of that. Like with every other character really in this movie, in this story. So yeah, I don't really know what I was expecting, because part 1 was disappointing and part 2 is even more disappointing because it doesn't save what it is that I was hoping for when it comes to this universe that Zack Snyder was creating. It's a victim. Part 2 is a victim of part 1, but then yeah, of course it'll be, because it's a continuation of the same story. So yeah, enough rambling on from me. They are my thoughts on Rebel Moon Part 2, The Scargiver. Maybe I'm going to be a little bit generous with this score, but a lot of it is because I do have that appreciation for what it is that Snyder is attempting to do, you know, attempting to create his own world, his own characters, you know, this kind of, the history. I couldn't help but be intrigued by what it was that Snyder is attempting to create. And again, just going down to the visuals, I'm a big fan of Snyder, and I am a big fan of his sort of visual sort of style, sort of how his movies look, and that does play a part. And so I do have a lot of admiration for what it was that Snyder was attempting to do with these movies, and that plays a big part into my score. But it was very disappointing. It was a very bland, flat, soulless experience. It's not unwatchable. I don't think these movies are unwatchable. And I think if I was 8 years old, 9 years old, 10 years old, or watching these movies for the first time, I'd fucking lap them up. Like, I really do feel like these are the type of movies as an 8-year-old I would love and I would really enjoy. But yeah, anyway, again, enough rambling on. They are my thoughts on Rebel Moon Part 2, and I will be giving Rebel Moon Part 2 a 4 out of 10. So yeah, they are my thoughts on Rebel Moon Part 2, but what did you guys think? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Do you agree or disagree with anything I've said? Then please let me know in the comments below and let's get a discussion going. And if you've made it this far into the video, thank you so much. I really do appreciate it. And if you want to watch future movie reviews from just some random Welsh geek ramble on, then please hit the subscribe button. It will mean an awful lot to me. My next review will be Challengers, and I'm in the middle or just coming towards the end of watching a lot of TV shows at the moment. So I have got a lot of TV reviews on the way as well. Free Body Problem is one of those. So yeah, thank you for watching. I really do appreciate it, and I'll be catching you guys soon.